Hello and welcome to Channel Name, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. I am Dr. John H. Watson, and tonight I invite you to join me in recounting a most singular case from the annals of my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the mystery of the killer on the Tower Bridge Walkway. Chapter 1. The Distressed Client. Hello and welcome to Channel Name, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. I am Dr. John H. Watson, chronicler of the remarkable adventures of my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Tonight, I invite you to join me in recounting a case that stirred the very heart of London. A mystery as dark and tangled as the fog that enveloped our great city in the autumn of 1888. It is the tale of the killer on the Tower Bridge Walkway, a case that tested even Holmes's prodigious faculties and left an indelible mark upon my memory. It was a raw, fog-laden evening in November, the kind that wraps London in a shroud of mystery, muffling the cries of street vendors and the clatter of hooves upon the cobblestones. In our rooms at 221B Baker Street, the fire blazed cheerfully, casting dancing shadows upon the walls which were adorned with maps, newspaper cuttings, and the occasional bullet hole from Holmes's more restless moments. I sat at my writing desk, endeavoring to record the details of a recent case involving a stolen sapphire, while Holmes lounged in his armchair, his long fingers steepled before him, his eyes half closed in contemplation. A pipe, freshly lit, sent curls of smoke spiraling toward the ceiling, and the air was thick with the scent of his favorite shag tobacco. Holmes had been unusually silent that evening, his mind adrift in that curious state of repose that often preceded a burst of intellectual energy. I had grown accustomed to these moods, which could shift as swiftly as the Thames tide. He had just begun to expound upon the chemical properties of a new variety of tobacco ash, a subject upon which he had recently embarked with alarming enthusiasm, when a sharp, insistent knock at the door shattered the quiet. "Mrs. Hudson is prompt tonight," I remarked. Attention. She was clad in the somber black of mourning, her dress of fine silk but plainly cut, as though she sought to deflect notice. A heavy veil obscured her features, but her posture, rigid with nervous energy, and the trembling of her gloved hands betrayed her agitation. She clutched a lace handkerchief, its edges frayed from anxious twisting, and her slight frame seemed to quiver as she stepped into the warm glow of the room. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" she inquired, her voice low and unsteady, as though she feared to speak too loudly. "I am he," Holmes replied, gesturing to a chair by the fire. "And this is my friend and colleague, Dr. John Watson. Pray be seated, and tell us how we may assist you." The lady hesitated, then sank into the chair, her movements delicate yet burdened. She lifted her veil, revealing a face of striking beauty, though pale and drawn with grief. Her eyes, a deep hazel, were red-rimmed, and her lips trembled as she spoke. "My name is Miss Eleanor Grayson," she began, her voice gaining strength as she continued. "I come to you because I am in desperate need of help. My brother, Captain Harold Grayson, was found dead 2 nights ago on the walkway of the Tower Bridge. The police say it was an accident, a fall, they claim. But I am certain, Mr. Holmes, that he was murdered." Holmes leaned forward, his sharp features illuminated by the firelight, his eyes narrowing with that intense focus I had come to recognize as the prelude to a case of significance. "Murder is a grave accusation, Miss Grayson," he said, his tone calm but probing. "What leads you to such a conclusion?" Miss Grayson drew a shuddering breath, her fingers tightening around the handkerchief. "My brother was no reckless man, sir," He was a retired naval officer, disciplined and cautious, with no penchant for drink or folly. He had been in excellent spirits, planning a new venture, a shipping enterprise. To suggest he simply fell from that walkway is absurd. And there is more. She reached into a reticule and produced a small, crumpled piece of paper. Holmes's lips curled into a faint smile, the kind that signaled his mind was already racing ahead, piecing together fragments of a puzzle only he could see. "Tell me everything, Miss Grayson," he said, settling back in his chair. "Omit no detail, however trivial it may seem." Miss Grayson recounted her tale with a mixture of grief and determination. Captain Harold Grayson, aged 35, had served with distinction in the Royal Navy before retiring to pursue private ventures. He had been a man of impeccable character, though not without enemies, as his naval career had involved rooting out corruption among certain officers. 2 weeks prior, he had mentioned to his sister a troubling discovery, something about irregularities in a shipping contract linked to the construction of the Tower Bridge, though he had been vague on details. On the night of his death, he had left their home in Kensington, saying only that he had an appointment near the Thames. The next morning, a worker discovered his body on the high walkway connecting the bridge's twin towers, his skull fractured, his limbs broken from the fall. "The police insist he was intoxicated," Miss Grayson said, her voice rising with indignation. "They claim he wandered onto the walkway and fell. But Harold never drank to excess, and he had no reason to be on that bridge at such an hour. Someone lured him there, Mr. Holmes. Someone meant him harm." Holmes listened in silence, his eyes fixed on the fire, though I knew his mind was far from idle. When Miss Grayson finished, he rose and paced the room, his dressing gown swirling about him like a cloak. "The Tower Bridge is still under construction," he mused almost to himself. "A dangerous place for a midnight rendezvous. And this note, 'The shadow moves at midnight,' suggests a clandestine meeting, perhaps with someone your brother trusted or feared. Watson, what do you make of it?" I cleared my throat, aware that my deductions rarely matched Holmes's in precision. "It sounds like a warning, or perhaps a code. The reference to midnight implies a specific time, and shadow could mean a person lurking in secrecy. But I confess, Holmes, I'm at a loss as to its precise meaning." "Grayson, leave this matter with me. I shall visit the scene tomorrow and ascertain the truth of your brother's death. Return home, and rest assured that Sherlock Holmes does not take such cases lightly." Miss Grayson rose, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Watson, I knew you would understand." She replaced her veil, and with a final trembling nod, she departed into the foggy night. As the door closed, Holmes turned to me, his eyes alight with that fierce energy that heralded a new adventure. "Watson, this is no mere accident. A naval officer, a cryptic note, a death on an unfinished bridge. This case promises to be most stimulating. Prepare yourself, for tomorrow we venture to the Tower Bridge, where I suspect we shall find more than the police have seen." I felt a familiar thrill course through me, the anticipation of another journey into the labyrinth of crime, with Sherlock Holmes as my guide. Little did I know that this case would lead us through the darkest corners of London, where shadows moved not only at midnight, but in the very heart of human greed. Chapter 2. The Scene of the Crime. The morning following Miss Eleanor Grayson's visit to 221B Baker Street was as bleak as any I had seen in London. The fog, which had clung to the city like a jealous lover the previous night, showed no sign of relenting. It swirled about the cobblestones, muffling the clatter of hansom cabs and rendering the gas lamps along Baker Street mere smudges of light. I found Sherlock Holmes already dressed when I emerged from my room, his lean figure silhouetted against the window as he peered into the shrouded street below. "Come, Watson," he said without turning, his voice brisk with purpose. "The Tower Bridge awaits, and with it, the truth of Captain Grayson's demise. Bring your revolver. One can never be too cautious in such matters." I complied, tucking my service revolver into my coat pocket, though I hoped it would remain unused. Holmes, for his part, seemed almost cheerful, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar intensity that always accompanied a new investigation. We descended to the street, where a hansom cab awaited, its drive against the gray. A constable, stationed at the base of the northern tower, eyed us warily as we alighted from the cab. Holmes presented his card with a flourish, his manner so authoritative that the young officer stepped aside without question, though not without a muttered comment about meddling amateurs. We began our ascent up the narrow, winding staircase within the tower, the iron steps ringing beneath our boots. The air grew colder as we climbed, the wind keening through the open latticework, and I gripped the railing tightly, acutely aware of the dizzying height. We emerged onto the walkway, a precarious platform some 100 feet above the Thames. The fog was thinner here, but the wind was fierce, tugging at my hat and sending a shiver down my spine. The walkway itself was a stark affair. Iron girders and wooden planks, with railings on either side to prevent workers from plunging to the river below. It stretched between the towers, a ghostly path suspended in the mist, and I could not help but feel a pang of unease at the thought of Captain Grayson meeting his end in such a desolate place. Holmes, however, was in his element. He moved with the precision of a predator, his eyes darting over every surface, his long fingers tracing the contours of the railings. "Here, Watson," he called, crouching near the center of the walkway. "This is where the body was found. Observe." I joined him, peering at the spot he indicated. The planks were scuffed, as one might expect from a construction site, but Holmes's attention was fixed on a faint scratch on the iron railing, barely visible to the naked eye. He produced his magnifying glass, its lens catching the weak light, and examined the mark with intense scrutiny. "A sharp instrument made this," he said, his voice low but animated. "Not a knife, but something finer, a tool perhaps, or a weapon. The angle suggests it was drawn downward, as in a struggle." I frowned, trying to follow his reasoning. A struggle, but the police said he fell. Could it not have been an accident? Was placed to suggest a fall, but the evidence betrays a more deliberate act. I glanced down at the river below, its surface barely visible through the fog. The thought of a man being hurled from such a height was chilling, and I tightened my grip on my revolver. "You believe he was attacked, then? But by whom? And why here, of all places?" Holmes rose, his eyes scanning the walkway's length. "That, my dear Watson, is what we must ascertain. The note, 'The shadow moves at midnight,' suggests a rendezvous, likely clandestine. Grayson was lured here, perhaps under the pretense of a meeting. The oil, the scratch, the absence of footprints, all point to a struggle with someone familiar with this bridge." We continued our inspection, Holmes moving with the methodical precision of a bloodhound. Near the southern end of the walkway, he paused again, his attention drawn to a small, discarded object half hidden beneath a plank. He retrieved it with a pair of tweezers, A single brass button, its surface etched with a faint anchor motif. Naval, perhaps, he murmured, slipping it into an envelope. Or a clever misdirection. As we descended the staircase, a group of workers gathered near the base of the tower, their rough voices carrying through the fog. One, a burly man with a weathered face, was speaking loudly to his companions, his words catching Holmes's ear. "Saw a figure up there, I did," he said, gesturing toward the walkway. "Night of the captain's death, round midnight. Cloaked he was, moving like a ghost. Didn't think much of it then, but now." Holmes approached the man, his manner disarming yet authoritative. "You saw this figure clearly?" he asked. The worker, startled by Holmes's sudden appearance, hesitated. "Not clear, sir. Fog was thick, and he was gone quick-like. But I'd swear he weren't no worker. Too swift, too purposeful." Holmes thanked the man and led me back toward the cab, his expression thoughtful. "A shadowy figure at midnight," he mused. "It aligns with the note, but it is too convenient, Watson. A true killer would not." Holmes's certainty was unshakable. As we neared Baker Street, he turned to me, his voice low and resolute. "Tomorrow, Watson, we shall visit Scotland Yard. Lestrade will have his theories, no doubt, but they will be as useful as a candle in a storm. The truth lies in the details, and we have only begun to uncover them." The cab halted outside 221B, and as we stepped into the familiar warmth of our rooms, I felt the weight of the case settle upon me. Captain Grayson's death was no accident. Of that I was now certain. But who had lured him to that desolate walkway, and why? The answer, I knew, lay in Holmes's relentless pursuit of the truth, a pursuit that would lead us deeper into the shadows of London's underbelly. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Fog. The fog that had enveloped London on the morning of our visit to the Tower Bridge showed no sign of lifting, as Sherlock Holmes and I made our way to Scotland Yard. The city was a labyrinth of shadows, the gas lamps casting feeble pools of light that seemed to dissolve into the mist. The air was heavy with the mingled scents of coal smoke, damp wool, and the faint briny tang of the Thames, which seemed to permeate every corner of the capital. Holmes, clad in his Inverness cape, strode ahead with his usual purposeful gait, his eyes darting to every detail of the bustling street. The cry of a newsboy, the shuffle of a beggar, the glint of a brass door-knocker half hidden by the fog. I, for my part, was still reeling from our findings on the bridge walkway. The scratch on the railing, the smudge of machine oil, the brass button with its naval motif, and the dock worker's tale of a shadowy figure at midnight had woven a tapestry of intrigue that I could not yet unravel. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated, his mind already sifting through the clues with that relentless precision I had come to admire. "Scotland Yard will have their theories, Watson," he had said as we left 221B Baker Street. "But I wager they will be as substantial as this fog, visible, but lacking substance." We arrived at Scotland Yard shortly after 11. Convenient conclusion, but one that fails to account for certain inconvenient facts. Lestrade leaned back, his chair creaking under his weight. "Facts, is it? The man was found at the base of the Tower Bridge, skull cracked, limbs broken. He'd been drinking by all accounts, and wandered onto the walkway. It's a dangerous place, Holmes, especially at night. He fell. Simple as that." I glanced at Holmes, expecting a sharp retort, but he merely smiled, that faint, enigmatic smile that often preceded a devastating argument. "Simple, you say? Then perhaps you can explain the scratch on the railing made by a sharp instrument, or the presence of machine oil where a naval officer's hands should have been clean. And what of the note found in his grasp? The shadow moves at midnight. Does that, too, suggest a drunken misadventure? Lestrade's brow furrowed, and he reached for a file on his desk, flipping it open with a touch of impatience. The note? A scrap of nonsense, likely something he picked up somewhere. As for scratches and oil, that bridge is a construction site, Holmes. You'll find all manner of marks and muck there. You're making mountains out of molehills. Holmes's eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. Molehills, Lestrade? Permit me to enlighten you. He produced the brass button from his pocket, holding it up to the light. This was found on the walkway, near where Grayson's body lay. It bears a naval insignia, yet it does not match the uniform of Captain Grayson as described by his sister. And then there is the testimony of a dock worker who saw a cloaked figure on the bridge at midnight. A figure too purposeful to be a mere wanderer. Lestrade snorted, though I detected a flicker of unease in his expression. A button and a ghost story? That's thin even for you, Holmes. If you must know, we've a suspect in mind, a Lieutenant Marcus Vane, a naval man who quarreled with Grayson not 3 days before his death. They'd been at odds for years, ever since Grayson reported Vane for some shady dealings in Portsmouth. Waste men on a case that's already solved. Holmes rose, his movements fluid and deliberate. Very well, Lestrade. You have given us a name, and for that I thank you. But I assure you this case is far from solved. Watson, let us take our leave. There is work to be done. As we stepped back into the foggy street, I could not help but voice my thoughts. Vane sounds a likely suspect, Holmes. A naval rival with a grudge, seen near the bridge. It fits, does it not? Holmes's lips twitched in that familiar, faintly amused smile. Does it, Watson? Simplicity is the enemy of truth. Vane's quarrel is too obvious, his presence too neatly timed. A true killer does not advertise his motives so brazenly. No, this is a red herring, designed to distract from the real culprit. The scratch, the oil, the note, these point to a mind more subtle than a hot-tempered lieutenant. We hailed a cab, the fog closing in around us as we settled into its damp interior. Where to now? I asked, my curiosity piqued. To the docks, Holmes replied, his eyes fixed on the shrouded city beyond the window. The worker's tale of a cloaked figure intrigues me, and the oil smudge suggests a connection to the bridge's machinery, or those who operate it. We must learn more about the men who labor there, and what secrets they might conceal. The cab rattled along the embankment, the Thames a shadowy presence to our left. As we approached the docks, the air grew thicker with the smells of tar, salt, and rotting wood. The fog was denser here, cloaking the wharves in an eerie silence, broken only by the creak of ships' rigging and the distant shout of a stevedore. Holmes's plan was clear: to seek out the workers who frequented the bridge, particularly those who might have seen the mysterious figure at midnight. But I could not shake the feeling that we were venturing deeper into a web of deception, where every clue was a thread leading to an unseen spider. We disembarked near a cluster of warehouses, their looming shapes barely discernible in the mist. Holmes led the way with unerring confidence, his long coat billowing as he navigated the narrow alleys. Keep your wit, face of the unknown. Holmes, however, seemed undaunted, his sharp gaze already searching the crowded room for a face or a clue that might lead us closer to the truth. Chapter 4. A Curious Disguise. The fog that cloaked London's docks was as impenetrable as ever, as Sherlock Holmes and I stepped from our cab into the labyrinthine alleys near the Thames. The air was heavy with the briny scent of the river, mingled with the acrid tang of tar and the faint decay of rotting timbers. Our visit to Scotland Yard had yielded little but Inspector Lestrade's predictable dismissal and the name of Lieutenant Marcus Vane, a naval officer whose quarrel with Captain Grayson made him an all-too-obvious suspect. Holmes, however, had little patience for such convenient solutions. "Vane is a distraction, Watson," he had said as we left Lestrade's office. "The truth lies not in the obvious but in the shadows. Quite literally, if our dockworker's tale of a cloaked figure is to be believed. Our destination was the Anchor's Rest, a tavern nestled among the warehouses of the East End, where dockworkers and sailors gathered to drown their weariness in cheap ale. Holmes had deduced that the machine oil on the Tower Bridge railing and the worker's account of a mysterious figure pointed to someone connected to the bridge's construction. Perhaps a laborer or foreman with secrets to hide. To uncover these secrets, Holmes proposed a bold strategy. He would infiltrate the tavern in disguise, posing as one of the workers, while I kept watch, ready to intervene if his subterfuge faltered. As we approached the tavern, Holmes paused in a shadowed alley, his movements swift and deliberate. From a satchel he produced a tattered coat, a stained scarf, and a battered cap, transforming himself in moments into a weathered stevedore. His posture shifted, his shoulders hunching, his gait adopting the weary shuffle of a man accustomed to hard labor. Even his face seemed altered, smudged with soot, his sharp features softened by the low brim of the cap. I marveled at the transformation, though I could not suppress a twinge of unease. "Holmes," I whispered. Glasses and the occasional thud of a fist on a table. I took a position near the door, feigning interest in a pint of ale, my eyes never straying far from Holmes. He moved through the crowd with ease, his disguise flawless. To the casual observer, he was just another dock worker, his movements unhurried, his demeanor unremarkable. Yet I knew that beneath this facade, his mind was a whirl of observation, cataloging every face, every gesture, every whispered word. He settled at a table near the back, where a group of men, burly, weather-beaten, and clad in the rough attire of bridge workers, were engaged in heated conversation. Holmes ordered a pint, his voice gruff and accented with the cadence of the East End, and leaned back, seemingly absorbed in his drink. I watched, my heart pounding, as he subtly maneuvered closer to a corner table where two men spoke in low, urgent tones. One was a hulking figure with a scarred face, his hands stained with the same machine oil we had found on the bridge railing. The other was leaner, his eyes darting nervously about the room. Holmes's position allowed him to overhear their words, though I could catch only fragments from my vantage point. Thorn, plans, midnight, keep it quiet. The name Thorn sent a jolt through me. Could this be the key to the shadowy figure on the bridge? Holmes's face betrayed no reaction, but I saw his hand tighten briefly on his glass, a signal that he had heard something of significance. He shifted his chair, angling himself to better catch their conversation, and I strained to observe without drawing attention. The scarred man leaned closer to his companion, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Silas Thorne'll have our hides if we don't deliver. Grayson was trouble, but he's gone now. No more questions, see?" My pulse quickened. Silas Thorne, a name I had not heard before, but one that clearly held weight in this murky underworld. Was he the cloaked figure, or perhaps the mastermind behind Grayson's death? I glanced at Holmes, hoping for a signal, but he remained focused, his eyes half closed as if dozing, though I knew his mind was razor sharp. "Holmes, and heading for the door. Holmes signaled me with a subtle nod, and I followed him as he slipped out after them, maintaining a discreet distance. The fog was a blessing now, cloaking us as we trailed the men through the winding alleys of the docks. Their footsteps echoed on the cobblestones, and Holmes moved like a shadow, his disguise still intact. I struggled to keep pace, my boots slipping on the damp stones, my heart pounding with the thrill of the chase. The men paused near a warehouse, their silhouettes indistinct in the mist. Holmes halted, pulling me into the cover of a stack of crates. "Listen, Watson," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Silas Thorne is no mere worker. He is a foreman on the bridge, and I suspect he is involved in something far larger than a single murder. Those men spoke of plans, likely the naval documents Grayson was investigating. We must learn more of Thorne's role." The men moved on, disappearing into the fog, and Holmes deemed it too risky to pursue further. "We have what we need for now," he said, straightening and shedding his disguise with a few deft movements. "Thorne is our link to the truth, but we must approach him cautiously. A man who orchestrates murder will not hesitate to strike again." We returned to the tavern to retrieve our cab, the fog now so thick that the driver's lantern was a mere pinprick of light. As we rattled back toward Baker Street, I could not help but voice my thoughts. "Holmes, this Thorne, do you believe he is the killer? And what of these plans? Could they be the motive for Grayson's death?" Holmes's eyes glinted in the dim light of the cab. "Thorne is a piece of the puzzle, Watson, but whether he wielded the weapon or merely directed it remains to be seen. The plans, I suspect, are naval in nature. Perhaps blueprints or contracts tied to the bridge's construction, which Grayson uncovered in his investigation. His death was no random act. It was a silencing." I nodded, though the complexity of the case was beginning to overwhelm me. The scratch on steps through London's docks clung to Baker Street as Sherlock Holmes and I returned to the sanctuary of 221B. The revelations from the Anchor's Rest, the name Silas Thorne, the whispered talk of plans, and the mention of a midnight rendezvous under the North Tower had set my mind ablaze with questions. Holmes, however, seemed almost serene. His lean frame relaxed as he sank into his armchair, though I knew from long experience that this calm masked a mind working at feverish speed. The hour was late. The fire burned low, and Mrs. Hudson had retired, leaving us to the quiet of our rooms and the weight of the mystery before us. "Watson," Holmes said, breaking the silence as he lit his pipe. "The threads of this case are beginning to weave together, but we lack the pattern. The note found in Captain Grayson's hand, 'The shadow moves at midnight,' is our Rosetta Stone. It is time we decipher its meaning." I rose from my chair, my curiosity overriding my fatigue, and joined him at the table, where he had spread out the evidence we had gathered. The brass button with its naval motif, a sketch of the scratch on the bridge railing, and, most crucially, the crumpled scrap of paper Miss Grayson had given us. The note, smudged with oil and written in a hurried hand, seemed to pulse with significance in the lamplight. I had puzzled over its cryptic phrase during our cab ride back, but its meaning remained elusive. "It sounds like a warning," I ventured, "or perhaps a signal for a meeting. But why would Grayson carry such a note? And who wrote it?" Holmes's eyes gleamed as he took up the paper, holding it to the light. "Precisely the questions we must answer, Watson. Observe the handwriting. Uneven, rushed, yet deliberate in its choice of words. This is no casual scribble. And the oil smudge, as we noted on the bridge, suggests proximity to machinery, likely the bridge's own works. But there is more here than meets the eye. He produced his magnifying glass and examined the note with meticulous care, his long fingers turning it this way and that. The paper is of common stock, used by precision of the surgeon's scalpel. I watched, fascinated, as he jotted down the letters of the phrase, then rearranged them, testing various permutations. The simplest ciphers, he explained, use transposition or substitution. Given Grayson's naval background, I suspect a transposition cipher, where the letters are reordered according to a specific key. For nearly an hour, Holmes worked in silence, his brow furrowed, his pipe forgotten. I contented myself with stoking the fire and refilling my teacup, knowing better than to interrupt his process. At last he leaned back, a faint smile of triumph crossing his lips. "Eureka, Watson," he said, holding up the paper. "The cipher is a simple columnar transposition, using the word shadow as the key. When rearranged, the message reads, 'Meet at North Tower, midnight.'" I stared at the paper, where Holmes had neatly aligned the letters into a grid, revealing the hidden message. "So Grayson was lured to the bridge," I said, my mind racing. "Someone sent him this note, knowing he would decipher it and come to the rendezvous." "Precisely," Holmes replied, his voice tinged with satisfaction. "The note was not a warning but an invitation, one Grayson could not resist, given his investigation into the irregularities his sister mentioned. The oil smudge suggests the writer was connected to the bridge's machinery, which aligns with our discovery of Silas Thorne's name in the tavern." I frowned, piecing together the implications. Thorne, then, could be the author of the note, or at least involved in the plot. But why kill Grayson? What was he investigating that warranted such a drastic act? Holmes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "That, Watson, is the heart of the matter. Grayson's sister spoke of a shipping venture, but also of his concern about irregularities tied to the bridge's construction. The men in the tavern mentioned plans, likely naval documents or blueprints, given the cipher and the button's naval motif. I suspect Grayson uncovered a scheme, perhaps involving conspiracy. But we lack the final piece. Tomorrow, we must seek out Thorne himself, though I suspect he will not welcome our inquiries." I nodded, though the complexity of the case was beginning to weigh on me. "And how do we find him? The docks are vast, and he may already know we're asking questions." Holmes paused, his gaze fixed on the fire. "We shall return to the bridge at dawn, Watson. Workers gather early, and Thorne, as a foreman, will likely be among them. I may employ another disguise, a clerk perhaps, to blend with the administrative staff. You, my dear friend, will play the part of a concerned physician inquiring about worker safety. It will give us access without arousing suspicion." I could not help but smile at Holmes's penchant for theatrics, though I dreaded the prospect of another venture into the fog-bound docks. "And if Thorne is the killer?" I asked, my hand instinctively brushing the revolver in my coat pocket. "Then we shall have our answer," Holmes said, his voice low and resolute. "But I suspect Thorne is but a cog in a larger machine. The true mastermind remains in the shadows, and we must draw them out." As the clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the room, I felt a strange resonance with the note's cryptic phrase. The shadow moves at midnight, indeed, and I sensed we were drawing closer to its identity. Holmes returned to the table, his fingers tracing the ciphered note once more, as if seeking some final secret hidden in its folds. "Grayson was no random victim, Watson," he said softly. "He was lured to his death with precision, and the note is proof of a calculated mind. But every plan has a flaw, and we shall find it." I retired to my chair, my mind a whirl of clues and conjectures. The naval cipher, the oil-smudged note, the brass button, and the name Silas Thorne formed a puzzle that only Holmes could hope to solve. Yet I felt a growing certainty that we were on the cusp of a breakthrough, even as the fog outside seemed to mirror the mystery within. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across a spark in our investigation. The words, penned in a hurried hand and smudged with machine oil, confirmed that Captain Harold Grayson had been lured to his death on the Tower Bridge walkway. The name Silas Thorne, overheard in the smoky confines of the Anchor's Rest, loomed large as a potential key to the mystery. Yet Holmes remained cautious, suspecting Thorne to be but a cog in a larger conspiracy. As we sat in the warm glow of 221B Baker Street, the fog pressing against the windows, Holmes proposed a daring plan. A midnight stakeout at the north tower of the Tower Bridge, where we might catch the elusive shadow in the act. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low and resolute. "The note suggests a pattern of midnight meetings. If Thorne or his associates are indeed using the bridge for illicit purposes, they may return tonight. We must be there, unseen, to observe." I felt a thrill of apprehension, tempered by the familiar excitement of accompanying Holmes on such a venture. "And if we encounter this cloaked figure the dock worker mentioned?" I asked, my hand instinctively brushing the revolver in my coat pocket. Holmes's eyes glinted with a mixture of amusement and determination. "Then we shall follow, Watson, and see where the shadow leads us. Dress warmly, and bring your revolver. The night promises to be both cold and perilous." We set out just before 11, the fog thicker than ever, cloaking London in a ghostly shroud. The streets were nearly deserted, save for the occasional hansom cab rattling past, its lanterns mere pinpricks of light. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the briny scent of the Thames and the faint tang of coal smoke. Holmes, clad in a dark overcoat and scarf, moved with his usual feline grace, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. I followed close behind, my heart pounding, the weight of my revolver a reassuring presence. The Tower Bridge loomed ahead, its skeletal towers barely visible through the mist. We approached the North Tower, where a narrow staircase led to the high walkway. Holmes, his feet in an instant, motioning for me to follow. "Quickly, Watson, but keep your distance. We must not be seen." We trailed the figure through the fog-bound alleys, our footsteps muffled by the damp cobblestones. The chase was a test of endurance and stealth, for the figure moved swiftly, weaving through the labyrinthine streets with the ease of one familiar with the terrain. Holmes, however, was relentless, his eyes never leaving our quarry, his movements as silent as a cat's. I struggled to keep pace, my breath coming in short gasps, the fog stinging my lungs. The figure led us deeper into the East End, where the warehouses loomed like silent giants, their windows dark and uninviting. At one point, the cloaked figure paused, glancing back, and I caught a glimpse of a pale face beneath the hood, too fleeting to discern features, but enough to confirm this was no ordinary worker. Holmes signaled for me to crouch behind a stack of barrels, and we watched as the figure continued, turning into a narrow alley flanked by crumbling brick walls. We followed, the fog now so thick that I could scarcely see Holmes ahead of me. The alley was a dead end, terminating at a high wall, and for a moment I feared we had lost our quarry. But Holmes, with his uncanny instincts, pointed to a faint movement in the mist, a shadow slipping through a gap in the wall. We hurried forward, only to hear a sudden clatter, as if something had been dropped in haste. The figure vanished, swallowed by the fog, and Holmes knelt to examine the ground. "There, Watson," he said, his voice sharp with excitement. He retrieved a small object, a pocket watch, its silver case glinting faintly in the light of a nearby gas lamp. He turned it over, revealing an engraved naval crest, identical to the motif on the brass button we had found on the walkway. "This is no coincidence," Holmes murmured, slipping the watch into his pocket. "Our shadow is careless, or perhaps desperate." I peered into the fog, my heart still racing from the chase. "Did you see their face, Holmes? Could it have been Thorne?" Holmes shook his head, his expression thoughtful. The figure was too slow, where Holmes insisted on a brief inspection of the staircase and surrounding area. The fog made it difficult to see, but he found no further clues, save for a faint scuff mark on the ground near the crates where we had hidden. "Someone stood here before us," he noted, watching perhaps as Grayson met his fate. "The shadow moves at midnight indeed." As we hailed a cab back to Baker Street, the city seemed to close in around us, its secrets hidden in the fog. I ventured a question. "Holmes, do you believe this figure is the killer, or merely a courier in this scheme?" Holmes leaned back, his eyes half closed. "Neither, Watson, nor both. The figure is a link in the chain, but not the hand that struck Grayson down. The watch and the button suggest a naval connection, but the oil smudge and Thorne's name point to the bridge itself. We are unraveling a web, and each thread leads us closer to the center." Back at 221B, the fire had burned low, but Holmes was far from ready to rest. He spread the pocket watch and the brass button on the table alongside the ciphered note and began to sketch connections between them. "The naval crest," he mused, "is that of the HMS Valiant, a ship Grayson served on. The button and watch may belong to the same man, or they may be planted to mislead us. We must verify Thorne's movements and uncover his associates." I sank into my armchair, the events of the night swirling in my mind. The chase through the fog, the fleeting glimpse of the cloaked figure, the glint of the pocket watch, all pointed to a deeper conspiracy, one that Grayson had stumbled upon and paid for with his life. "What next, Holmes?" I asked, my voice heavy with fatigue. "Tomorrow," he replied, his gaze fixed on the fire. "We seek out Silas Thorne. But we must be cautious, Watson. The shadow knows we are close, and a cornered animal is most dangerous when it feels the hunter's breath." As the clock struck 2, its chimes a faint echo of the midnight bells that had set our chase in motion, I felt a renewed resolve. The mystery of the Tower Bridge was far from solved, but reach. Yet Holmes was undeterred, his mind already plotting our next move. "Watson," he said as we settled by the fire, the pocket watch gleaming on the table beside the brass button and the decoded note. "The naval crest on both the watch and the button points to a connection with Grayson's past. But the oil smudge and Thorne's name anchor this crime to the bridge itself. We must look higher, to those who oversee its construction. Sir Benjamin Stone, the bridge's architect, will have answers, whether he wishes to share them or not. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by this new direction. The architect? Surely a man of his stature would not be involved in something as sordid as murder. Holmes's lips curled into a faint smile. Innocence is often a mask, Watson. Stone has access to every aspect of the bridge, its plans, its workers, its secrets. If illicit activities are occurring under its framework, he would know, or at the very least, suspect. We shall pay him a visit tomorrow. The following morning the fog had thinned slightly, though the air remained damp and chill as we made our way to Sir Benjamin's office in the city. The streets were alive with the clatter of hooves and the cries of vendors. But my thoughts were consumed by the case. The ciphered note, "Meet at North Tower, midnight," had confirmed Grayson's death as a calculated act, and the pocket watch suggested a naval conspirator. Silas Thorne, the foreman, was a likely suspect. But Holmes's focus on Sir Benjamin intrigued me. Could a man of such renown be entangled in this web? Sir Benjamin Stone's office was a testament to his success. A spacious room on the upper floor of a grand building near the Guildhall. The walls were lined with bookshelves, their volumes interspersed with intricate models of bridges and civic structures. A large desk dominated the space, covered with blueprints and technical. Momentary tightening of his jaw that did not escape Holmes's notice. "A tragic accident, I heard," he said, gesturing for us to sit. "The Walkway is no place for a man at night, especially in such fog. But I fail to see how I can assist you." Holmes seated himself, his posture deceptively relaxed. "An accident, you say? Yet certain details suggest otherwise. A scratch on the railing, a smudge of machine oil, a note clutched in the victim's hand. These are not the hallmarks of a mere fall, Sir Benjamin." The architect's eyes narrowed, though he maintained his composure. "Construction sites are full of such marks, Mr. Holmes. The bridge is a hive of activity. Oil, tools, and workers are commonplace. As for a note, I know nothing of it. The police have ruled it an accident, have they not?" "They have," Holmes replied, his voice smooth as silk. "But their conclusions are often premature. Tell me, Sir Benjamin, have you noticed any irregularities among the workers? A foreman, perhaps, named Silas Thorne?" At the mention of Thorne's name, Sir Benjamin's hand paused as he reached for a teacup, a gesture so slight I might have missed it but for Holmes's keen attention. "Thorne is one of many foremen," he said carefully. "A competent man, if a bit rough. I have no reason to suspect him of anything untoward." Holmes leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "And yet, our inquiries suggest Thorne was absent from his post on the night of Grayson's death, despite claiming otherwise in the worker logs. A curious discrepancy, would you not agree?" Sir Benjamin's face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened around the teacup. "The logs are kept by clerks, Mr. Holmes. Errors are not uncommon in such a large project. I assure you everything is in order." Holmes produced a notebook and flipped it open, revealing a sketch of the worker log he had evidently studied. This entry, dated the night of the murder, lists Thorne as present. Yet a dock worker claims he was seen elsewhere. And then there is the matter of plans. Documents Grayson was investigating, possibly naval in nature, hidden within the... Not coincidences. If you know anything of Thorn or these plans, I urge you to speak. Sir Benjamin rose, his posture rigid. I have nothing more to say, Mr. Holmes. My work is with stone and steel, not conspiracies. If you have evidence, take it to the police. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have pressing matters to attend. Holmes stood, his expression unreadable. Very well, Sir Benjamin. But know this. The truth has a way of rising, like the Thames at high tide. We shall meet again. As we left the office, the fog seemed to close in around us, mirroring the opacity of Sir Benjamin's responses. In the cab back to Baker Street, I could contain my curiosity no longer. Holmes, do you suspect Stone himself is involved? He seemed defensive, but he's a man of reputation. Holmes's gaze was fixed on the misty streets. Reputation is a fragile thing, Watson. Stone's evasion was telling, his pause at Thorne's name, his dismissal of the logs. He knows more than he admits, though whether he is complicit or merely aware remains to be seen. The bridge is his creation, and no detail escapes his notice. If plans are hidden within it, he is either negligent or involved. I frowned, grappling with the implications. And Thorne? Do we confront him next? Holmes nodded. Thorne is our next link, but we must be strategic. He is a man of action, not subtlety, and likely to react with force if cornered. We shall observe him tomorrow at the bridge and see what further threads we can unravel. Back at 221B, Holmes spread out the blueprints he had surreptitiously studied in Stone's office, his fingers tracing the intricate lines of the tower bridge. The bridge is more than a structure, Watson, he said. It is a fortress of secrets, and Grayson died for uncovering one. Tomorrow, we tightened the net. As the fire crackled and the fog pressed against the windows, I felt the weight of the case settle upon me. Sir Benjamin's secret, whatever it was a piece of the puzzle on the table. We have gathered enough threads to weave a trap. Thorne is involved, of that I am certain, but whether he is the mastermind or a pawn remains to be seen. We must lure him or his superior back to the bridge where the crime began. I leaned forward, intrigued but apprehensive. A trap? How do you propose to do that, Holmes? Thorne is no fool, and if he's the killer, he'll be wary of any move we make. Holmes's lips curled into a faint, enigmatic smile. Precisely why we shall use his own methods against him. The ciphered note that lured Grayson to his death was a masterful deception. We shall craft a similar lure, one that promises the very plans he and his associates are so keen to protect. The shadow moves at midnight, Watson, and we shall ensure it moves toward us. He rose and began pacing, his dressing gown swirling about him like a cloak. We shall forge a note, written in the same naval cipher, suggesting a meeting to exchange the plans Grayson was investigating. Thorne or his confederate will not resist the bait, for it touches the heart of their scheme. We shall enlist Lestrade's aid to ensure the trap is secure. I frowned, the audacity of the plan stirring both admiration and concern. Lestrade? He was dismissive at Scotland Yard. Will he agree to such a scheme? Holmes chuckled softly. Lestrade is predictable, Watson. His pride will bristle, but his curiosity, and his desire to claim credit will compel him to assist. We shall meet him tomorrow and arrange for constables to be stationed near the North Tower. You and I will take the lead, observing from the walkway itself. The following day we ventured to Scotland Yard, where Inspector Lestrade received us with his usual mix of skepticism and grudging respect. Holmes laid out the plan with characteristic precision, omitting no detail. The forged note, the midnight rendezvous, the need for discreet reinforcements. Lestrade's brow furrowed as he listened, his fingers drumming on his cluttered desk. "This is a gamble, Holmes," he said at last. It matched the killer's style. "The bait must be irresistible," he murmured, holding the note to the light. "Thorne, or his master, will come." That evening, as dusk settled over London, we made our way to the Tower Bridge. The fog was lighter than the previous night, but still thick enough to cloak our movements. The bridge's iron framework loomed like a specter, its towers piercing the mist. Holmes, clad in a dark coat and scarf, carried the forged note, which he intended to plant in a worker's toolbox known to belong to one of Thorne's associates. I followed, my revolver a comforting weight in my pocket, my nerves taut with anticipation. We reached the base of the North Tower, where scaffolding and crates provided ample cover. Holmes moved with the stealth of a cat, slipping the note into the toolbox with a deftness that betrayed his experience in such subterfuge. "Now, Watson," he whispered. "We take our positions on the walkway. Lestrade's men will be below, but we must be the first to spot our quarry." We ascended the narrow staircase, the iron steps creaking under our weight. The high walkway was as desolate as ever, the wind whistling through the latticework, the Thames a shadowy ribbon below. We crouched behind a stack of crates near the center of the walkway, our breath visible in the chill air. Holmes's eyes scanned the darkness, his posture alert yet composed, while I gripped my revolver, ready for whatever might emerge from the fog. The minutes stretched into an eternity, the silence broken only by the distant cry of a gull and the soft lapping of the river. As the church clock struck 11:30, Holmes tensed beside me, his hand resting lightly on my arm. "Listen," he breathed. Faint footsteps echoed from the southern end of the walkway, deliberate and cautious. A figure appeared, cloaked and hooded, moving with the same stealth we had observed during our midnight chase. My heart pounded, but Holmes remained still, his eyes fixed on the figure's approach. The figure paused near the toolbox, bending to retrieve the note. In the faint light, quicker, belonging to another figure. This one was slighter, their face obscured by a scarf, but their movements betrayed a nervous energy. They approached the center of the walkway, pausing as if expecting to meet Thorne. Holmes's grip tightened on my arm, his voice a barely audible whisper. "This is no mere courier, Watson. This is the shadow we seek." The figure paced, their agitation growing, and I realized with a start that Thorne had not returned. Had he sensed the trap, or was he lying in wait elsewhere? Holmes, sensing the same, rose silently, motioning for me to follow. We crept closer, using the crates for cover, until we were mere feet from the figure. Suddenly, a noise, a sharp clatter from the staircase, startled the figure, who turned and fled toward the southern tower. Holmes sprang into action, his long legs carrying him after the figure with astonishing speed. I followed, my revolver drawn, the fog swirling around us as we raced across the walkway. The figure was swift, but Holmes was relentless, closing the distance with every stride. As we reached the southern staircase, the figure stumbled, and Holmes seized the moment, tackling them to the planks. A brief struggle ensued, the figure's scarf falling away to reveal a young man, his face pale and drawn with fear. "Who are you?" Holmes demanded, pinning him down. "And what is your business with Thorn?" The man gasped, his eyes wide. I'm just a messenger. Thorn sent me to collect the plans. I swear, I didn't kill anyone." Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. "The plans, you say? Where are they hidden?" Before the man could answer, a shout from below signaled Lestrade's approach. The constables swarmed the walkway, their lanterns cutting through the fog. Thorn, it seemed, had slipped away. But the young messenger was in custody, his confession a crack in the conspiracy's armor. Holmes rose, his expression one of grim satisfaction. "We have our pawn, Watson," he said. "Now we must find the king." As the constables led the messenger away, I felt, as we returned to 221B Baker Street, the weight of the case pressed heavily upon me, tempered only by Holmes's unshakable resolve. "Watson," Holmes said as he paced before the fire, the naval pocket watch and ciphered note laid out on the table. "Thorn is no mere foreman. He is the linchpin of this conspiracy, but he acts under orders. The messenger's confession confirms the plans are naval in nature, likely blueprints or contracts stolen from the Admiralty, hidden within the bridge's framework. We must force Thorn's hand, and there is only one place to do it: the walkway where Grayson met his end." I felt a chill, despite the warmth of the room. Another confrontation on the bridge? "Holmes, Thorn is dangerous. If he's the killer, he won't hesitate to strike again." Holmes's eyes gleamed with a fierce intensity. "Precisely why we must act swiftly, Watson. Thorn believes he has evaded us, but his arrogance will be his undoing. We shall use the same cipher to lure him back, suggesting the plans are at risk. He will come, and we shall be ready." The plan was audacious even for Holmes. He crafted another forged note, using the naval cipher we had deciphered. "Plans compromised. Meet at Walkway, midnight. No delays." To ensure Thorn received it, Holmes enlisted a street urchin from his network of irregulars, instructing the boy to slip the note into a toolbox at the bridge, where Thorn's associates were sure to find it. "He will suspect a trap," Holmes admitted, "but his need to secure the plans will outweigh his caution. We shall have Lestrade's men on hand, but you and I, Watson, will face him on the walkway." The prospect of confronting a murderer on that perilous platform sent a shiver through me. But I nodded, my trust in Holmes absolute. We prepared for the night ahead, Holmes arming himself with a weighted cane, while I checked my revolver, its familiar weight a small comfort. Lestrade, though skeptical, agreed to provide a small contingent of constables, stationed discreetly at the creak of the walkway and the distant lap of the river. Then a heavy tread sounded from the northern end of the platform, deliberate and unhurried. A burly figure emerged from the mist. Silas Thorn, his face hardened by years of toil and secrecy, his eyes glinting with suspicion. He carried a heavy wrench, its metal catching the faint light of a gas lamp below, and his posture suggested a man prepared for violence. Holmes stepped forward, his cane held loosely at his side, his voice calm but commanding. "Mr. Thorn," he said, "your game is up. The plans you've hidden, The murder of Captain Grayson, all unknown. Surrender now, and you may yet mitigate your fate. Thorne's lip curled into a sneer, his grip tightening on the wrench. You're the meddler, Holmes, he growled, his voice rough as gravel. Grayson stuck his nose where it didn't belong, and now you're doing the same. You think you can trap me? You'll end up like him. I raised my revolver, my heart pounding, but Holmes signaled for me to hold. The plans, Thorne, he said, his tone unyielding. Where are they hidden? And who is your master? Speak, and you may avoid the gallows. Thorne laughed, a harsh guttural sound. You know nothing, Holmes. The plans are worth more than your life, or mine. You'll get nothing from me. With a sudden movement he lunged, swinging the wrench at Holmes's head. Holmes, with his uncanny reflexes, sidestepped, the cane flashing up to parry the blow. The clash of metal rang out, echoing across the walkway. I aimed my revolver, shouting, "Thorne, stop!" But he paid me no heed, his bulk bearing down on Holmes with ferocious strength. The struggle was fierce, the fog swirling around them as they grappled near the railing. Holmes, though lean, was wiry and agile, using Thorne's momentum against him. He struck a precise blow to Thorne's wrist, forcing him to drop the wrench, which clattered to the planks. Thorne, the walkway itself. The struggle had weakened a section of the platform, and I felt the planks shift beneath my feet. "Holmes!" I shouted, grabbing his arm as we stumbled back. Thorne, seizing the moment, lunged for the southern staircase, disappearing into the fog before the constables could reach him. Lestrade arrived, his face flushed with frustration. "Blast it, Holmes! He slipped us again." Holmes, unfazed, steadied himself against the railing. "Not for long, Lestrade. He's given us the location of the plans. Our next task is to retrieve them, and his mention of an employer confirms my suspicions. Thorne is not the mastermind." We descended the walkway, the constables forming a perimeter to ensure no further escape. The fog seemed to mock our efforts, cloaking Thorne's retreat, but Holmes's mind was already racing ahead. "The South Tower, Watson," he said as we reached the base of the bridge. "We must search it at once. The plans are the key to this conspiracy, and they will lead us to the true shadow." As Lestrade organized a search for Thorne, Holmes and I prepared to investigate the South Tower. The confrontation had been perilous, but it had yielded a crucial revelation. The plans hidden in a false beam were within our reach, and with them, the truth behind Grayson's murder. Yet I could not shake the image of Thorne's escape, nor the chilling realization that a greater mind was orchestrating this deadly game from the shadows. Chapter 10. The Final Deduction. The confrontation on the Tower Bridge walkway had brought us tantalizingly close to the truth. Yet Silas Thorne's escape into the fog had left the case unresolved. His confession, that the stolen naval plans were hidden in a false beam in the South Tower, had given us a critical lead, and Sherlock Holmes wasted no time. With Inspector Lestrade's constables securing the bridge, we had searched the South Tower at dawn, recovering a tightly bound packet of documents concealed within a hollowed-out beam. The plans, as Holmes had suspected, were naval blueprints for a new class of warship, marked with Admiralty seals and annotations in a hurried hand. Their discovery confirmed the motive behind Captain Grayson. "Watson," Holmes said, leaning back in his armchair, his pipe sending curls of smoke toward the ceiling. "The mystery of your brother's death is solved, though not without cost. The evidence before us tells a tale of greed, deception, and betrayal, woven into the very framework of the tower bridge. Allow me to lay it bare. He rose, his movements deliberate, and gestured to the items on the table. Let us begin with the note found in Captain Grayson's hand. The shadow moves at midnight. As we discovered, it was a naval cipher, transposed to read, Meet at North Tower, midnight. This was no warning, but a lure, designed to draw Grayson to the walkway where he was killed. The handwriting, smudged with machine oil, pointed to someone with access to the bridge's machinery, a clue that led us to Silas Thorne, a foreman with a dubious reputation. Miss Grayson's eyes widened, her hands clasped tightly. Thorne, was he the one who killed my brother? Holmes nodded, his expression grave. Thorne was the instrument of your brother's death, but not the mastermind. Let us follow the trail. The scratch on the walkway's railing, made by a sharp tool, suggested a struggle, not a fall. The absence of footprints in the dust indicated Grayson was carried or dragged to the spot where his body was found, staged to look like an accident. The oil smudge on the note and railing further tied the crime to the bridge's construction, where Thorne, as foreman, had unfettered access. He picked up the brass button, its naval crest glinting in the firelight. This button, found on the walkway, bore the insignia of the HMS Valiant, Grayson's former ship. At first it seemed to implicate a naval rival, such as Lieutenant Marcus Vane, whom Inspector Lestrade so eagerly suspected. But Vane's quarrel with Grayson was too convenient, a red herring meant to distract. The button was planted, likely by Thorne, to mislead the police. I interjected, unable to resist. But what of the pocket watch, Holmes? The scratch on the railing, and pushed him to his death, ensuring the body was positioned to suggest a fall. Miss Grayson's voice trembled. But why, Mr. Holmes? Why would they kill Harold over these plans? Holmes's gaze softened, though his tone remained steady. Greed, Miss Grayson. The plans were worth a fortune to foreign powers or private interests. The bridge's construction provided the perfect cover. Its chaos of workers and materials allowed Thorne and his associates to move the documents undetected. Your brother, with his naval background and keen sense of duty, posed a threat to their scheme. His death was a calculated act to protect their profits. I frowned, a piece of the puzzle still missing. But Thorne mentioned an employer, Holmes. Who orchestrated this? Surely not Sir Benjamin Stone, the architect. Holmes shook his head, his eyes gleaming with the triumph of deduction. Stone was complicit, Watson, but not the mastermind. His evasion during our interview and the discrepancy in the worker logs suggested he knew of Thorne's activities, but chose to turn a blind eye, perhaps for a share of the profits, or to protect the bridge's reputation. The true architect of this scheme was a naval officer, one with access to the Admiralty's secrets and the authority to manipulate men like Thorne. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The pocket watch and button pointed us to the HMS Valiant, and further inquiries, conducted discreetly through my irregulars, revealed a retired admiral, Sir Reginald Harrow, who served with Grayson and had a history of financial troubles. Harrow, desperate to restore his fortunes, orchestrated the theft of the plans, using Thorne as his enforcer and the bridge as his hiding place. The cloaked figure we chased was Harrow's intermediary, a junior officer named Lieutenant Ellis, whose watch we recovered. Miss Grayson gasped, her hand rising to her mouth. Sir Reginald? Harold spoke of him with respect, though he mentioned a falling out years ago. Holmes nodded. Harrow's respectability was his shield. He used his connections to secure the plans. Harold's death was not in vain. You've brought his killers to justice, Mr. Holmes. I cannot thank you enough. Holmes waved a hand, his demeanor modest but his eyes alight with satisfaction. Justice is its own reward, Miss Grayson. Your brother was a man of honor, and his memory is served by the truth. As Miss Grayson rose to leave, her gratitude palpable, Holmes turned to the fire, his expression growing pensive. Crime, Watson, he mused, is often born of greed, a hunger that consumes both the guilty and the innocent. Yet truth, when pursued with rigor, restores balance. But I wonder, do we chase justice or merely the satisfaction of order? I considered his words, struck by their depth. Perhaps both, Holmes, I said. Justice for Grayson, and order for our own peace of mind. He smiled faintly, his pipe glowing in the firelight. Well said, Watson. Now, let us have some tea and put this case to rest. As Miss Grayson departed, her steps lighter than when she had first arrived, I took up my pen to record the final details. The fire crackled, the stars shone outside, and the mystery of the Tower Bridge was at last resolved. Yet Holmes's question lingered, a philosophical echo of the case's moral lesson. The pursuit of truth, though arduous, upholds justice and protects the innocent, reminding us that greed unchecked can unravel the fabric of society.